We live in a world of cycles. Nature functions in rhythms and cycles. So while our modern world and mass media may have been caught off guard to some degree by the changes that we're seeing now, I have to tell you, our indigenous ancestors for 5,000 years have been telling us that we would live a time of tremendous change. Now, they had no way of knowing exactly what that change would mean, but it should not come as a surprise that we're living this time of extremes, because there are natural cycles and rhythms that are converging in a very rare way. We've never seen this in our lifetimes. We haven't seen it in recorded human history.
That was Gregg Braden, and you're listening to the Tappin' Within podcast. In today's bite-sized wisdom clip, we're extracting from a conversation we had with a rare blend of visionary, scientist, scholar, and spiritual guide who was an internationally renowned pioneer in the new emerging paradigm based in science, social policy, and human potential. His research has led to 15 film credits and 12 New York Times bestsellers, such as Human by Design, The Divine Matrix, and the latest, The Wisdom Codes. Gregg Braden speaks worldwide alongside other leaders like Dr. Bruce Lipton and Dr. Joe Dispenza. He's partnered with visionary organizations such as the HeartMath Institute to extend his message of the new human paradigm. And as it seems, it all boils down to this: we are going through a massive transformation as a species, and we're much more powerful than we think. And that's exactly what we'll get into today. Gregg breaks down the cycle that the planet is living in as we're going through a new era of economic development, innovation, and new social dynamics. We'll understand why the Darwinian model of nature is outdated based off the new science. We'll also cover why competition is no longer serving us for our future. So now let's dive into what Gregg has to say about the current cycle we are going through as humanity.
Where there are natural rhythms and cycles, some of those we know about, some we don't. Climate, for example, is one of the rhythms, one of the natural cycles that is changing, and that's always changing. Climate is dynamic, so it's not static. And as a geologist, I love to talk about this. I talk about it all day. If we look at the ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica that record every year of climate for over 400,000 years, and in those layers of ice, we can see how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere, how strong was the sun, how strong were the magnetic fields, how high were the oceans. We can see that. And what we see is that there are rhythms and there are cycles within cycles, 5,000-year cycles, 10,000, 26,000, 41,000, 100,000 year cycles, and they were happening before humans ever emerged on the earth. So we are not the cause. We have contributed. We have to say that. We've contributed, but we are not the cause. So in and of itself, we are living a time where the cycles tell us we should be experiencing a shift in climate. But that's not all. We're also living the convergence of a cycle of economics. Now, when people hear about economies, they think about money, but economies don't have to be about money. Economies are about relationships and how people and communities and societies and nations share vital resources like food and energy and water and medicine. Money may be involved, but I have lived with indigenous communities that don't use money at all, that have very, very robust economies. We happen to be living in the close of an economic and an innovation cycle, which means by definition the birth of a new economy and a new innovation cycle. And the third major cycle right now is we are living a time, and this is a really unusual thing for many people to hear about. Human conflict occurs in cycles. I had the opportunity to speak with my dear friend, my scientific colleague, and my spiritual brother, Bruce Lipton, We were at the United Nations in New York City, and they asked us to talk about what we saw happening in the world, what we could expect. So they were looking for ideas of how to plan resources and allocate money and funding. And when I mentioned conflict cycles, they said, how come we've never heard of this? What the best science of the modern world is telling us is that social coherence and even the way that we relate to the people that we share our homes with, our relationships, our lives, all are influenced. I'm going to be very conscious with that word. They're not governed and we are not slaves to the cycle, but we are susceptible and vulnerable to influences of magnetic fields of our planet, magnetic fields of the sun, and we are in a very low, a record low magnetic point right now, in between solar cycles. We're between solar cycle 24 and 25. What that means, I'll just give you the quick equation, is that when the magnetic fields are low, scientists know that humans are more aggressive. We're less willing to cooperate to solve our problems. And the reverse is when they're high. Well, we're living this perfect storm. 2020 happens to be the lowest point in the magnetic fields right between those solar cycles. The economy obviously is shifting, very volatile right now, and climate. And you put all of those together into a global population that now is globalized. So we're trying to come together as a global family, working within a set of parameters that we've known in the past. Those parameters changed. That means our thinking must change, and the way that we think and live our lives has got to change. We need a new human story.
As humanity closes off this new cycle, the past, present, and future generations must come together to define the foundation for the next hundreds of years. All these technological, economic, environmental factors are on our side if we decide to relate to them more consciously. We have a perfect window of opportunity to do things differently this time. So now, Gregg will reveal a glimpse of his view on the new human, and to the core, it all begins with how we relate to ourselves and how we decide to come together as a collective. Let's get into it.
All right, so here's the deal. Our story, we are steeped in a story of competition, conflict, and struggle. We are led to believe that we are the product of random processes, this is Darwinism, random mutations.
Is this the theory, like also the theory of evolution, how competition, the survival of the fittest?
This is it. So we're led to believe that we are essentially lucky biology, random mutations, created forms of life that competed with one another, and that competition is what has led to our success as a species. This is the story. So now think about what's happening. We're globalizing a planet, that's true, and we're trying to do it by dealing with one another based upon the thinking that competition and struggle and conflict and scarcity is the fundamental rule of nature. Here's the problem. The best science of the modern world has overturned all of that. The best science of the 21st century tells us we are not the product of completely random processes. There is something, we have to say, there is something that has happened in our past that transcends the random processes. And the best science has told us that this is most important. The fundamental rule of nature is cooperation. It's not competition. So if we want to successfully meet the challenges that we that have arrived at our collective doorsteps, I think our best bet is to honor our relationship with nature and the natural world, honor that nature's model of cooperation. And I mean, I think about this. What would it mean to have a generation of young people from the moment they begin in school, in kindergarten, from the moment they begin to understand their relationship to the world and the kids around them, to think in terms of cooperation and working together In other words, what can I offer? What can I give? What can I share? How can I contribute? Which is very different from what we're led to believe of what can I get? What's in it for me? How do I benefit? All right, and we are all steeped in this story. So our economic model that's struggling is based in the false assumptions of competition and conflict. Our corporate model is based in this. Everything, so it's up for us right now. So this right now, we're living this rare convergence of the cycles that have changed the world as we have known it. And the new world that's emerging, the struggle and the suffering, comes from us trying to embrace that world through the old thinking of false assumptions of an obsolete science. Now, we've asked science to tell us who we are. And science has done a really good job. There are a lot of scientists that don't like the answer. Science has been hijacked by corporations. They cherry pick the data. By politics, they cherry pick the data. Climate change is a perfect example of how that's happening. Science has been hijacked by corporations, by politics, by religion, and by academia for reasons of money and power and ego and habit. And this is where we find ourselves now. And I believe that we're witnessing the breakdown of these old structures, these old ways of thinking, because we're living in a new world. And then I'll stop here. It takes one generation. One generation has to be the generation that lives the old world that is crumbling and also lives the new world that's not quite fully developed yet. So you're living in between these two worlds, and it takes a really strong person or a strong family or a strong community or a strong nation or a strong planet to live in this in-between time without getting lost in the fear of the unknown. This is where the new human story comes in, because the new science is giving us the reasons not to fear, if we are willing to embrace that science. So it's a long answer to a short question, but it lays the foundation for everything I think we're going to talk about.
We've heard the phrase that in order to elevate humanity, we must elevate ourselves. We're living in rare yet extremely exciting times, and as we go forward into this new cycle, we must be constantly aware that we're collectively creating the new world through how we act, how we speak, and how we relate to ourselves. I, for one, feel so optimistic about the future, and I know that our younger generations will create more consciously and, in a sense, reverse the negative effects left to us. It's so important, however, that all generations support each other and learn from one another. I really love this quote from the Black Panther when King T'Challa says, "In times of crisis, the wise build bridges and the foolish build barriers. We must find a way to look after one another as if we were one single tribe."